Welcome to 8-Limb Life, a podcast on living the 8 limbs of yoga, one step at a time. My name is Andra, and I am grateful you are sharing your time and presence with me as we explore this sacred wisdom. These teachings are ancient, but they're not meant to live in the past. They show up in how we speak, how we act, how we relate to others, and to ourselves. Each episode explores one of the limbs and how we can bring this wisdom into modern life. This is 8-Limb Life. Today on 8-Limb Life, I'd like to take a moment to step back. Before we dive deeper into each of the individual limbs and ask a simple question. Why do the 8 limbs matter? Why would a set of teachings written over 2,000 years ago have anything to offer us today? I think the answer is that while our world has changed dramatically, being human hasn't. We still wrestle with anxiety and comparison. We still search for purpose and belonging. We still lose ourselves in distraction, react in anger, cling to things that don't last, and long for a deep sense of peace. That's why these teachings continue to endure. Imagine you're setting out on a journey through an unfamiliar country. You wouldn't need someone to walk every step for you, but having a map could act as your guide. A map doesn't tell you exactly what every moment will look like. It doesn't eliminate wrong turns or difficult terrain. It simply helps you orient yourself. It reminds you where you are, where you're headed, and what matters when you lose your way. I think this may be the most beautiful way to understand the 8 limbs of yoga, not as rules or commandments, but as a map for living. Many people today encounter yoga first through movement, a class at the gym or a studio, maybe a video on YouTube. Movement is an extraordinary doorway, but somewhere along the way, many of us were handed one small corner of an incredibly rich tradition and told that was the whole thing. It's a bit like walking into a magnificent library and only ever reading one book. The postures, the physical practice we call asana, are only one limb of 8. The yoga tradition was never simply about creating stronger bodies or greater flexibility. It asked deep questions. How do we live well? How do we suffer less? How do we become more awake? How do we experience the peace that's already within us? These questions feel just as relevant today as they did when Patanjali first organized these teachings. More than 2,000 years ago, a sage named Patanjali gathered together the teachings of yoga into a remarkably concise text known as the Yoga Sutras. Rather than inventing yoga, Patanjali organized a tradition that was already being practiced and contemplated for centuries, distilling it into 196 short verses, or sutras. The word sutra literally means thread, like a thread weaving individual pieces into a single tapestry. Each sutra is brief, often just a sentence or two. Yet together they form a complete vision of what it means to live a life of greater awareness and freedom. What's striking is that the Yoga Sutras aren't primarily about poses. In fact, the physical practice of yoga receives only a few words. The vast majority of the text explores something much deeper: the nature of the mind, why we suffer, and the practices that help us live with greater clarity, compassion, and peace. Within those teachings, Patanjali offers what has become known as the 8 limbs of yoga, not as a rigid sequence to complete, but as an integrated path for living. They invite us to care for every dimension of our humanity: how we relate to others, how we care for ourselves, how we inhabit the body and work with the breath, how we study the mind, and ultimately, how we remember our deepest nature. Sometimes people imagine the 8 limbs as 8 steps on a ladder. Finish the first, then move to the second, graduate to the third, and eventually arrive at enlightenment. But from my perspective, I don't think that's the most helpful image. I think of the sutras more as the roots, the trunk, the branches, leaves, and flowers of the same living tree. They're interconnected. As you become kinder toward others, your meditation often becomes steadier. As your body grows healthier, your relationships may soften. As you become more honest with yourself, inner peace begins to emerge more naturally. Every limb nourishes every other limb. I wonder why Patanjali chose 8 limbs. Why not 3 or 10? Why organize the path this way at all? Of course, we can't know exactly what Patanjali intended, but I do find it meaningful that these 8 limbs touch nearly every dimension of what it means to be human. The yamas ask us to look outward. How do I meet the world? How do I treat other people? How do my choices ripple beyond myself? The niyamas gently turn our attention inward. How do I care for my own inner landscape? What habits help me cultivate clarity, gratitude, discipline, and trust? Then comes the body. Not because the body is the goal, but because it's where we live. Every joy, every heartbreak, every conversation, every breath is experienced through this remarkable body. Rather than seeing the body as an obstacle, yoga invites us to see it as a doorway. From the body, Patanjali guides us to the breath. It's almost impossible to separate the breath from the quality of our attention. Without anyone teaching us, we've experienced this. We hold our breath when we're startled. We sigh when something difficult finally passes. We breathe deeply when we stand before the ocean or beneath a canopy of redwood trees. The breath is constantly revealing the conversation between body and mind. From there, the path becomes even more subtle. It asks us to notice where our attention goes. In a world designed to pull our awareness in 1,000 directions, Patanjali was already asking one essential question. Can you choose where your mind rests? That question might be more relevant today than it has ever been. Finally, the last limbs point us towards something that can't really be explained, only experienced. Moments when the usual sense of separation begin to soften. Moments when we feel deeply connected to life, to nature, to humanity, or simply to the quiet presence beneath all the noise. When I step back and look at the 8 limbs as a whole, I don't see 8 separate practices. I see a vision of a whole human being. A person who relates to others with integrity, who cares for their own inner life, who inhabits their body with presence, who knows how to return to the breath, and who, every now and then, catches a glimpse of the deep peace that's always been there. Maybe this is what the 8 limbs have been inviting us toward all along. Not becoming someone new, but becoming whole. You don't need to memorize Sanskrit to practice the 8 limbs, though that may become a part of your journey. You don't have to learn 30 mantras or how to play singing bowls, unless that feels true to you and your path. You don't need to become someone different. These teachings belong to anyone who wants to live with a little more awareness. One thing I love about this path is it isn't asking us to become perfect. Perfection is exhausting and impossible to achieve. Instead, the 8 limbs invite us into practice. Practice means we'll forget. We'll lose our patience. We'll say the wrong thing. We'll cling to something we know we should release. We'll become distracted, and then we'll notice. And we'll begin again. That's yoga. It's not perfection, but presence. Returning again and again to the life that's unfolding right here. I sometimes imagine the 8 limbs as a guide I carry with me. I don't consult it because I'm failing. I consult it because I'm human. Some days life pulls me toward fear. Other days toward hurry, resentment, self-criticism, or distraction. The map doesn't judge me for wandering. It simply helps me remember where home is. It was Ram Dass who said, "If you think you're so enlightened, go spend a week with your family." I think this is where these teachings become the most difficult to live. But perhaps that's why these teachings have survived for so long. They don't belong to another culture or another time, but they speak to something timeless within us. They remind us that peace isn't something we achieve by controlling every circumstance. It's something we uncover by changing the way we meet our lives. The 8 limbs don't promise that life will become easy. They show us how to meet whatever life brings with greater wisdom, compassion, steadiness, and freedom. As we move through the rest of this season together, I hope you won't hear these teachings as rules. I hope you'll receive them as invitations, gentle practices, questions worth living. Because yoga was never meant to stay on the mat. It was always meant to accompany us into our conversations, our relationships, our grief, and our joy. Now, as we continue our journey through the 8 limbs, we're moving from those foundations into practices that help us cultivate presence in new ways. We'll explore the body through asana, the breath through pranayama, the turning inward of the senses in pratyahara, the steadying of attention in dharana, the spaciousness of meditation in dhyana, and finally samadhi, a word that points toward profound wholeness, freedom, and connection. Rather than separate destinations, each of these limbs supports the others. Together they form a map, a way of navigating the fullness of being human with greater ease. This is a path that meets us exactly where we are. Until next time, may this ancient map continue to help you find your way home. Thank you for being here and for exploring these ancient teachings together with me. If this episode resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who might need these teachings in their life. Until next time, may your practice continue to unfold, both on and off the mat. Namaste.